Hello and welcome to the Curated Conversation webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Arts in Cultural Heritage Management, the Master of Arts in Museum Studies, and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on museums and digital asset management. My name is Natalie Koss, and I am the event producer. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Curated Conversations playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the presentation to our moderator, Dr. Stephanie Brown, Assistant Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Arts in Museum Studies.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I know that different parts of the country are getting a lot of rain, and some places it's really, really cold. So I hope that you are snug and warm and ready to dive into the world of stewarding digital assets with us this evening. Whether you're an expert in managing digital assets or are only now shifting over from a card catalog, this conversation, I think, is going to be really interesting for you. So our guests today are Nelly Cancilla, who is the Digital Asset Manager at the Detroit Institute of Arts. She provides oversight of the DIA's digital asset management software. She trains stakeholders, she manages governance, and she supports staff enterprise-wide. She holds a BA in English from Oakland University and a Master of Information from the University of Toronto. In addition to their experience in digital asset management, they've held positions as scholarly communications and copyright librarian, communications librarian, and digital scholarship and liaison librarian, with specializations in copyright, scholarly publishing, and instruction. And I should say here that we invited Nelly to speak because one of my close colleagues, Joyce Ray, heard her speak and was so delighted and excited by the way that she was able to communicate her information. And so we're really happy that Nelly could be with us today. Joining Nelly is pretty much a Johns Hopkins family member, Alex Kron. Alex holds her MA in Museum Studies and a certificate in Digital Curation from Johns Hopkins. She interned for her digital curation at the Balboa Park Online Collaborative, a nonprofit tech consultancy in San Diego, California. There, she researched how cultural institutions in Balboa Park were leveraging accessibility and the monetization of their digital assets, and transitioned into a full-time position at Balboa Park Online Collaborative, BPOC, working with cultural institutions to develop digital strategies, data governance, and digital preservation plans. She also worked to support the implementation of collections management, content management, and digital asset management systems, and provide recommendations for system and process improvement. Kron now works as the community manager for Terentia, a platform for digital asset and collection management, where she develops and facilitates educational resources and learning opportunities for the GLAMP community. And she joined our faculty as a digital preservation instructor in spring 2022. So having said that, let me turn it over to Nelly to talk a little bit about her work. Well, after Nelly talks a little bit about her work, we'll hear more from Alex, and then the three of us will have a conversation for a little while, and then we'll open it up. So make sure you all put your questions in the Q&A box because we want to hear from you. Nelly.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I'm Nelly Cancilla, and I'm the Digital Asset Manager at the Detroit Institute of Arts in Detroit, Michigan. My role involves managing a team of DAM experts and overseeing the digital asset management system to provide assets to our institution and our community. To give you an idea of the scale and some of the history of our institution, the museum was founded in 1885 and moved locations to account for our growing collections in 1927. Among our first notable accessions are Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait and Diego Rivera's industry murals. And next slide, please. The DIA's collection stands in the top 6 of the nation, holding over 65,000 works. And the museum covers 658,000 square feet, that includes more than 140 galleries, a large auditorium, and a 333-seat lecture hall and recital hall. It also includes an art reference library and a state-of-art conservation services. As for our dams, we migrated to new dams in 2019, and since have been growing to an enterprise-wide model. So across our institution, whoever needs access to our dams is granted access. Before, it was very siloed and specific to different departments, and now anybody in our institution can use it. We support different departments within the institution to have access to high quality assets, as well as researchers and the museum community to support research and learning. Currently, we have over 14 terabytes of assets in our dams. Next slide, please. Within our dams, we have 3 main categories. We have artwork, documentary photographs, and conservation. Our artwork is connected to our content management system via an API and lives as the single source of truth of information on the artwork. So this is where everyone goes in the museum, within the museum, to gain access to artwork information, artwork metadata, anything to do with the provenance and copyright, and all of that information is stored there. So data about the artwork is shared with both the dams and the website, while images and image metadata are shared to the CMS, or the content management system, and the website. So we have a trilateral connection between the 3 systems, between the CMS, the dams, and the website, to ensure that we have a single source of truth in both the images that we display as well as the information about those assets. We hold assets in the category of documentary photographs as well. So this includes exhibition images, event photography, building views, and portraits. All of that is under the category of documentary photographs. And this is where marketing connects with assets, where they can get assets from there, as well as different historical values as well that the exhibition images hold. We also have a conservation section in the dams that has a lot of archive storage, where we hold images of conservation photography for the future. This is changing a little bit in terms of the content of our dams going forward. We are actually moving towards moving conservation to a more suitable cold storage, and having the dams just be for artwork and documentary photographs. This is a view of what our dams looks like. Just a quick little view of it. We have assets this is the artwork category, and we have assets in there that are across the board in terms of whether it's accessioned works, temporary holds, potential accessions, so things that our curators are considering in accessing into the collection. And on the left-hand side, you see that you can filter through and find what you're looking for. However, the search function is way more robust than that. I just wanted to give you a little view of what it looks like inside. But just to share a little bit of how I got where I am. I got my undergraduate degree in English literature and studio art, and then went for my library degree at the University of Toronto. While I was there, I had a number of different graduate jobs. One of them was working for the Faculty of Medicine as their digital asset manager or digital asset specialist. organizing the content that they had, mostly in physical form. So there was a lot of digitization and then organizing and attributing metadata. So it was from scratch, which was quite a challenge, especially being in grad school at the time. But I learned so much from that first job that really helped me grow in the future. Also, while I was in grad school, I had a practicum at World Vision, where I was a junior archivist, and I was able to go through hundreds and hundreds of hours of video and attribute metadata and organize them for the video crew there. That was a really heavy job. It's a lot emotionally to take that kind of content on a daily basis, but again, it really pushed me towards understanding digital asset management in a way that was really practical and achievable to do. After I was there, amongst research programs and research jobs, I got my first full-time position at the University of Toronto in their scholarly publication and copyright office. And this is where I really gained a lot of insight on specifically Canadian copyright law, but also in part US copyright law. I was able to take law classes as part of my job there, which was great at the law school, and really gained insight on copyright that would help me throughout my career. After that, I was at the University of Toronto Mississauga Library working in communications, and then later in the digital scholarship division. And my time there really helped me get access to work on digital scholarship platforms, and brought me back to digital asset management really after a little break in there for copyright and communications. So that's how I got where I am. I'm happy to say I've been at the DIA for more than 2.5 years, and I've loved it so far. And I'm looking forward to discuss more in the future.
That's awesome, Nelly. Thank you. Alex, how about let's take a look at your slides. Learn a little bit about you.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's great to hear more from you, Nelly, about your journey. My background's a little unconventional, especially as a military spouse of 14 years. But I do think it's important, to talk about that experience and the knowledge that I've gained and how that's helped me in my work over the years. I think it also paints a really realistic picture of what working in this field looks like, because sometimes finding a job in a museum or a library and archive can be really challenging, and so you kind of have to sometimes look outside of the field to get translatable experience. If we could go to the next slide, please. While I've always loved museums as a visitor and as a student, I did not start working in museums initially. In fact, I didn't start working in museums until after getting my bachelor's degree in art history. Digital asset management, however, has been a part of my work for a long time. Before crossing over into the cultural heritage field, I worked in various administrative roles for commercial construction businesses and a federal contractor who provided services for the National Museum of the Marine Corps. This work included digitizing and managing digital files, mostly scanned and born digital documents in a typical hierarchical folder structure in networked storage devices. But life has a funny way of changing your plans and altering your path, especially as a new military spouse. For those who may not be familiar with assess, adapt, improvise, and overcome, it's a commonly used phrase by those in the Marine Corps. It's a guiding principle for combat. And this is a phrase that I've taken to heart as life brings change, especially, given uncertain times. When my husband's job required us to move, I volunteered in museums while I looked for work. Unfortunately, the lack of experience I had in museums made it difficult to find a job in a museum, even for a paid internship at the time. I was told that people with master's degrees were applying for the same internships I was. Fortunately, I was able to find a job with that federal contractor. And then in 2014, at 8 months pregnant, my husband's job took us to Japan for several years. While we lived there, I was a new stay-at-home mom with a young child, while my husband frequently deployed. So with few options for work, but a strong desire to get into a field that I was passionate about, I chose to dive into a master's degree in museum studies and digital curation at Johns Hopkins University, which I was also, fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time visiting the local museums and experiencing the culture while living in Japan. If we could go to the next slide, please. It was in the summer of 2017 that we moved back to the United States and settled in San Diego. At this time, I was nearly finished with my master's degree, but still needed to complete my digital curation internship and research paper. Now, my understanding of digital asset management at this point had changed. No longer was I only thinking about basic file organization and management, but I was thinking about long-term preservation, file format, obsolescence, and siloed data. Digital asset management and digital preservation are two sides of the same coin. And I didn't have a single connection in the museum world in San Diego. Joyce Ray, who was overseeing my internship and research paper at the time, was kind enough to put me in touch with Nick Honeysett, the CEO of Balboa Park Online Collaborative. This introduction turned out to be life-changing. Nick ended up being a very crucial part of my professional growth and a great mentor. I completed the internship with BPOC. I graduated, and I found work as a collections manager in a small museum in Balboa Park, while also doing some contract work for BPOC. Now, while working at this small museum, I photographed our object collection and oversaw the implementation of a digital asset management system and the migration of those digital assets with no migration plan and very little technical support, which, bodes really well when you've, never done a project like that before. To say it was rough is an understatement, but it was an experience that provided, a lot of valuable lessons, including my first question of why digital asset management systems and collections management systems were separate systems to begin with. But that is a whole other conversation. During my time at BPOC, when I did leave the museum, I eventually did take on a full-time role at BPOC. For context, I was fortunate to work on a number of projects that allowed me to see how institutions of all sizes, of all disciplines, operate across all different departments. Much of my work initially focused on systems and process analysis, reviewing organization operations and providing strategic recommendations for improvement. This grew into assisting institutions reviewing, selecting, and implementing different types of systems, and eventually facilitating a webinar series talking about the different technologies that are used in cultural institutions. We were actually very fortunate to work with the DIA as well on one of those projects. So I've seen and I've worked with a lot of different types of systems inside and outside of the cultural heritage field at this point, from construction management and project management to content collection and digital asset management. This diverse experience really opened my eyes to honestly how shortchanged the cultural heritage field is when it comes to technology. And I should caveat that with modern technology. A lot of the systems that we use today look like they're from the early 2000s or the late 90s, which is rather unfortunate because with the technology that we have today, so much more is capable. So as Stephanie mentioned, in 2023, I was invited to teach JHU's digital preservation course in the spring semester. This is a privilege that I don't take lightly, and I'm excited to be able to share the knowledge that I've gained, from my time, and share those experiences with my students. Next slide, please. Sometimes it's hard to decide when it's the right time to move from a job. And I will readily admit I had a lot of anxiety initially in my decision. I spent 7 years total with BPOC, including my internship and contract time after all. But after meeting Neil Bilo, Terentia CEO, in 2020, seeing his passion for the sector and watching him grow his company, I felt a calling, and jumped at a chance when he said that Terentia was hiring. So I've been with Terentia for, I think it's 5 months now, so it hasn't been very long. And historically, cultural institutions have operated in siloed systems, often lacking the ability to integrate or requiring significant funds and knowledgeable staff to develop and maintain an integration. They've also, heavily relied on rigid metadata schemas. However, those have made it challenging to adapt to evolving standards and the diverse nature of digital collections, or making collections more accessible to cross-collection discovery. And I have, for a long time, considered it a possibility that with the technology we have today, so much more is possible in terms of managing our collections and digital assets together. But knowing it's possible and making it happen are vastly different. I just lack the technical skills and the knowledge around that to, actually develop that technology. But now it's 2025. And my knowledge of digital asset management has changed dramatically. It's now possible to have an enterprise level digital asset management system that understands object records and archival and library materials, and can manage exhibitions and be mapped to whatever data fields that you need, and be able to support your digital preservation activities through the cloud. It's as institutions, or sorry, let me backtrack. It's possible also, because I want to make sure that I talk about this, to use your dams to preserve languages now. One project that we're working on in particular with the Eastern Band of Cherokee is to help them preserve their language and use the platform to continue to teach tribal members, because they only have about 100 speakers left. And so it's these projects that really show how much our technology is involved and what's possible out there. And realistically, it's like, we got to be realistic here. There's no single system that's going to ever, check off every single box or meet every single need of yours. And so it's important to be able to prioritize, what your needs are, and whenever you're implementing a new technology. And that's kind of what I've got left to say. It's been a journey.
That's so awesome, Alex. Thank you.
Mhm.
I love hearing all of those shout outs to our programs and to the connections that you've made that way. We're always telling students, you got to, talk to your professor, talk to your professor, talk to your professor. It'll make a difference. And it's
Absolutely.
really great to hear, to have somebody come back and say, and then I talked to Joyce, and Joyce. So thank you both for talking to us about your work now and how you got into it. And I'm gonna bring us back to an earlier generation of museums and digital assets by talking about my first, early in my museum career. I was at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C. And I started as the archivist. I ended up as a curator. What I did a lot of was talking to docents and the public about the collection. And the museum, after I'd been there a couple of years, the museum acquired a scanner. It was very snazzy, very snazzy. It was like behind a locked door. And I because I gave lectures to the docents, I would say, well, we have all of these fabulous images in the archives. I want to share them with everybody, so I'm going to scan them. Well, that meant that I had to get behind the locked door, and it meant that I had to talk to our IT guy who had all of these questions for me that for which I had no answers. Like, well, how big a file do you want? Like, well, I want them to be able to see it from the audience. That's how big I want it to be. How big is that? You know, all of these things. Is it going to be a JPEG? Is it going to be a TIFF? I don't know. I don't know what's the difference between those things, right? But I mean, in the moment, and this was in the early 2000s, in the moment, I was just delighted that I could share these images for the first time, and frustrated that it was such a mystery how to make it happen and where to put them and how to find them and all those things. And in thinking about this tonight, I remembered standing there with the scanner 25 years ago, and I realized, oh my God, well, here we are. This is how the systems have evolved over 25 years, right? And I'm sure that there are some people with us tonight who can remember the first scanner that their institution purchased. And I'm sure that there are people here tonight who have no memory of a world without scanners. And so that's great. When you all think about dams, you talk about a collection context, you talk about an exhibition context, you talk about enterprise-wide, Nelly, you talk about that. And, you know, in museums, we're constantly working with the silos, right? So I'm curious about how do you persuade museums that the collection management system and the digital asset management system could actually be the same thing? And not only that, but that maybe you could also track the history of exhibitions that way. You could track archival data in the same way. How do those conversations go?
I can start out. So at our institution, we have separate CMS and DAMs. So we really haven't had conversations about having just one single platform. However, using tools like APIs, that really helps connect these different platforms and make them readable to each other and transferable to each other with this data. And this kind of model has helped us a lot in terms of using various different platforms, however, having the same information across the board, and how important it is to have transferable information that is readable to everyone across the enterprise. We want our curators and our marketing team to have the same kind of content or same kind of information.
Okay, so I want to hop in there. I mean, I've done curatorial work, and I know that sometimes there is information in the curatorial files that the curators don't want anybody else to see, right? And
Yes.
maybe it's something about the provenance. Maybe it's probably not anything. It's probably not that the item was stolen and it needs to be returned. That's probably not what it is. It's probably simply a question of, well, we have this letter from this guy, and he said that he didn't want anybody to see the letter, and so now we keep the whole thing secret. But you know, and then he died, and we can't reach it. I mean, it's usually something sort of benign but complicated. So what do you do then when you run into that? Well, we can share all of the information across, but you run into these issues of, oh wait, not that.
Yes. Yep, that comes at basically an ad hoc level, in terms of things that can't be shared to others. Across the organization, we have different permissions levels, and a curator might be able to see something different than let's say someone in marketing or someone in programming. However, working with those individual departments to make that possible really helps not only the institution, but communities at large. So I have an example. One example is we have a collection of Native American art, of Indigenous art. And we basically had it available to everyone on our website. However, we put placeholders instead of that, just basically like a text box saying that we're working with the individual tribes to make sure that this content is appropriate to share, because some artworks aren't for all eyes.
Right.
There should be different permissions levels and different safeguards to ensure that we are being responsible with the content that we have in our cultural heritage organizations. So that's just a little example. But yeah, definitely different permissions levels are key. So it starts out as a simple, oh, it's enterprise wide, but really at the individual level and at the department level, there's different safeguards to make sure that people are getting the appropriate information that they need.
Alex, did you have?
Yeah, I can expand a little bit more on that too, just because our technology, the ability to be able to merge collections and digital asset management is very new. So trying to convey that to the community has been a challenge, to be totally honest with you, just because we are so used to working in siloed systems and being so limited by the systems that we have, and requiring developers oftentimes to be able to configure or customize those systems to our needs. Trying to convey that in a demo and say, we can map this to whatever data you need or you want, even some of your workflows. It's hard to kind of get that imagining going, and that's still something that we're working through, and also kind of in part why I was hired, both because of my knowledge and experience in the museum field and you know, facilitating webinars and educational resources for the community to help start that education process. I'm kind of starting it this evening right now, to be totally honest. But to kind of go back to the other part of your, or secondary question, I guess, in terms of, you know, limiting access and permissions to things, this is all governance. And you have to establish that when you're implementing a digital asset management system. You can't just throw a dams up and put your content into it and, you know, just sometimes it is ad hoc, but you try to avoid that as much as possible, at least in terms of, you know, what capabilities there are for dams out there. You can set it, you know, with basic user permissions, levels, and access. But you can also create highly specific views. And when I say highly specific views, you can create like a marketing view that's specific to marketing, that they'll only see specific data fields when they're looking at a record for a digital asset, as an example. So when curatorial doesn't, you know, want to share provenance information, marketing won't have access to it.
Right. When you go into a place and when you start working with an institution, what's the level of understanding that people have about what it is you do? And I mean, at DIA, Nelly, outside of your team, what's the level of understanding that people have about what it is you do and how it relates to the bigger museum picture?
I think it's funny because a lot of us in the library, people just don't know what librarians do or what digital asset managers do. Even a friend of mine was like, I've known you forever, and I still don't really understand what you do. But yeah, it's a little tricky. That definitely is involved. It involves a lot of training. So in my training sessions, I meet with people across the museum that need access to our dams. And in those sessions, I kind of explain what I do and what digital asset management is, just because people don't really have a sense of what we do. And it's okay, because that's my job to inform. But really getting people on the same page of why it's important can be definitely an important task that I have in my training. Sorry, I just got distracted.
I know, well, and I did too, but I'm going to make sure everybody knows that Nelly's friend Sarah is with us tonight, and she just typed in the chat that she's literally watching because she wants to understand what it is that Nelly does. So, Sarah, you're a good friend. You're a good friend. We all see you, and we're all with you.
I love it.
Yeah, Alex, what were you gonna?
I mean, it's very similar to my answer before, because I get asked what I do and who I work for, and so having to explain that is, it's a challenge. When I explain, what digital asset management is in terms of, and I try to keep it pretty simple, talking about, folders and hierarchical structures and manage, because a lot of people are really familiar with, managing files in that way. And there are digital asset management systems that do operate in a similar fashion in a folder structure. It's not always as visual as kind of what Nelly was sharing in her during her presentation. And so I kind of start with basics and then go from there.
Yeah. Well, and you're a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to go ahead and open it up for questions and comments. And we have one from one of our recent alums who asks, with any of the systems you've used in your careers, has your institution created a cultural sensitivity statement for users who view your collections online? She says she focused on this for her internship, and she's always looking to see how others inform their audience of the potential, about potential or maybe even outright harmful materials.
My institution did not, but I highly recommend looking at Newfields. Newfields has a cultural sensitivity statement, and they've been working with local contexts that in tandem with their local tribal communities to be able to help identify objects that, of course, need to be returned to the tribal communities. What's too sensitive to show, so they can't have images, but they'll have very basic tombstone object information on the website. I'm happy to share that information, in the chat or after this webinar if you want to reach out to me directly, and I can get you in touch with Ann Young there. Oh, thank you, Stephanie. Perfect.
Sure.
Yeah. Definitely recommend checking out Newfields.
Sorry about that. And on my side, we don't have a blanket statement, but on particular images that are being housed on our dams and then pushed out to the website, if there is sensitive material or material that we've removed for sensitivity reasons, we have a place card there that explains why, and then again, tombstone data, just like Alex.
And say what you mean by tombstone data.
Tombstone data is basically like the very minimal title, artist, very basic information about about an object.
Mhm.
Right. It's I say tombstone, but I know other people say other things. And I'm teaching curatorship right now, and every spring when I teach it, I learn again how I have to define all the terms every time. Because it can get you lose one term and you're lost. That's it. The conversation's effectively over. So thank you. We have another question. What do you foresee as being a potential challenge for long-term preservation of digital assets? Do you think we've solved the obsolescence issue with current technology, or do you think we need to do some more work there?
I was actually having a conversation with somebody today.
Excellent.
Before the webinar this evening, I was at the National Information Standards Organization Symposium this week, and I was talking with a colleague about how digital preservation is never going to end. Never. As long as technology continues to evolve, we get new file formats, we get new platforms, you name it, it's going to continue. It's not going away. We have to, plan for that. And when I say plan for that, not just like a conceptual plan of how you're going to manage your digital assets, but you need to, figure out how you're going to fund that too, because it costs money.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Who funds that? Do you get a grant from do you get a Ford Foundation? Do you go to Google and say, hey, Google, how about if you give us your pocket change? How do you, I genuinely have no idea.
It varies.
Yeah.
Totally, to be totally honest, a lot of smaller institutions will rely on grant funding to be able to purchase and implement a digital asset management system. And if they're doing it correctly, or properly, I should say, they're building in the cost of that system over a period of time in the grant. So whatever system that they're selecting, they'll be able to afford for, a set period of time, whether it's 5 years or more or less.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
On our side, a lot of our work is supported by grant funding. However, DAMS is built into our IT budget and is a yearly cost from the museum.
Thank you. Another question. In general, what is the current situation in museums regarding how they work internally on their collections and digital assets? So this is where I think this question is coming from. I think it may be coming from a place of, oh my God, you could never get completely caught up, right? And so how do you manage the how do you figure out where to sort of take hold, right? Because maybe there's a collection at the DIA, maybe you've got, and I'm making this up, maybe you've got letters from Diego Rivera to whichever Ford it was he was working for, and they haven't been digitized. And the Ford, maybe the people aren't completely sure that they want that to be out there in the whole world for everybody to see, but there's still important documentation. How do you decide who's at the table when you decide on your priorities for what you need to get done first?
I think really the library is at the front of it. We really have to advocate for what we see as historically and informationally rich in value. And from there, getting the director on board, getting grant funders on board. These are all kinds of things that we have to consider. In terms of prioritizing what gets done, again, it depends on what's historically rich, what is has a demand. I'm working through a backlog right now. My team is of getting old photos from past years that are just siloed data on hard drives across the institution, and getting these up on our DAM system. And really, we have to do that with some discretion, a lot of thought behind it, because we don't want to waste precious resources
Right.
with people time or staff time, as well as storage space. These are things that we need to consider when we're putting things up onto our dams, and really being stewards of the collection, and prioritizing what we see as historically and informationally rich.
Right. And to decide what is historically and informationally rich, I mean, I trained as a historian. When I went off to do my dissertation research in France on women who were accused of political crimes, my advisor said, well, there's not really anything about women in the archives. I mean, it turns out there is a lot, but it's that kind of, for a very long time, we thought only in terms of certain groups of people doing certain groups of things as being historically valuable. So who makes the decisions about what's historically valuable and what we need to make an effort to preserve?
Our archivist plays a big part in that, and I'm really grateful that we have an amazing archivist who really advocates for our collections, and future collections. And besides that, I would say our general department in the library, we do the assessing and really have discussions on what we should prioritize and what is important versus maybe we can wait on a little bit.
Yeah. I'm going to shift gears. We have a question that I do not understand, so I'm going to read it to you. You both mentioned some complexity in either DAM configurations or APIs and interoperability. Can you talk about those challenges? Are you relying on expertise in-house or through a vendor? Now, can you tell me what an API is? I'm sorry, I really don't know.
Yep, no problem. An API is basically a how do I say this? It's a program that connects to different platforms. So it makes it,
Okay. Okay.
It's a
Yeah.
string of codes that basically
Okay.
lets these two platforms talk to each
Talk to
other.
each other. Okay.
So we have historically used outside coders to generate our APIs and maintain it. And we are actually in the process of reconfiguring and basically redoing our API. So it's kind of a huge project. I was going to say kind of a big project, but it's a huge project.
I will say, yeah.
And one of the big hurdles, I would say, is documentation. When we had our previous API, our current running API developed, there was no documentation for how it works, what it includes, what it does. So really, when problems arise, we're kind of guessing. So with our current situation where we're moving towards a new API, we're really prioritizing documentation and being part of the process so that when things arise, then we don't have to outsource help. Our own IT department or our own department can tackle those issues.
Yeah. Thank you. We have 10 minutes left and we have a couple more questions. There's one, we have a big question and it concerns the elephant in the room. I'm going to put that off for just a little bit and we can continue to have this nice, thoughtful, ethereal discussion before and just think about intellectual things for a little bit more. Have you seen moves to integrate AI to your systems or in institutions that you've worked with? What's AI doing to your work? If it's doing anything.
Yeah, Alex, do you want to go or do you want me to start?
I was gonna say I have some things to share, but I figured I'd give you a chance to talk first if you had something to share first.
Sure. So we have several AI integrations that are automatically part of our package that are across the board. One is basically an advanced search that takes common language and common forms of questions like what is blah blah blah, or how you basically search in Google and translating that into our database page. So that is one that's automatically integrated. They do have our vendor does have potential AI integrations. However, we are pretty hesitant to adopt that as there are quite a few implications and potential negative aspects to AI. So we aren't actually currently pursuing that.
Yeah, and I can speak a little bit more on the vendor side of things with that, because we do have AI capabilities in the platform, AI insights, where it's facial recognition, it's automatically generating keywords, it's creating transcripts, it's translating those transcripts into multiple languages, it's automatically creating clips from videos, creating captions for those videos. There's a lot there. With that said, we have our own AI policy as a vendor, which you don't see too many, unfortunately, with. Hopefully we'll see more of that going forward into the future. But we're powered by Microsoft Azure, and part of the reason why we went with Microsoft was because they will not read your data. So with the AI technology that's part of the platform, it's your data. It doesn't feed into it doesn't feed into Copilot as an example. It doesn't feed into any of the LLMs that Microsoft's, creating. But when we are working with a cultural institution who wants to implement those AI features and functionality, we heavily encourage them to develop a policy on AI use, because especially in terms of facial recognition, when you have video assets that you're uploading into your digital asset, those AI tools will automatically identify those people. They won't necessarily identify their name if that information is not in the DAMs, but it's really important to consider the human aspects here, which is why we really encourage putting together that policy before you implement those features and functionality. Some other mechanisms that we have in the platform in terms of the AI generating keywords for digital assets, there is the user ability to be able to toggle those on and off. So there's some human oversight there. So it's not just automatically tagging these images and videos with keywords, and there's not really, room to filter that.
Right.
So that I could go into more than that, but we don't want to spend too much time on AI today, I think.
But it's helpful, on in the university, we are also trying to figure out how AI is going to impact what we do. And we're trying to make policies for things that we don't really understand and that we haven't really seen in action. So, all right, last question. What do you see as the potential fallout from the current administration's new limitations on NEA grants and attempts to control cultural decision-making at the national level? For example, the removal of DEI initiatives, projects, and offices in Smithsonian and National Gallery.
A really good question.
It's a really good question, and I want to hear what you think about it, and I also want you to know that nobody thinks that you're the experts on this. I mean, don't feel like you have to give the last word. We're all making it up as we go.
We're actually in the process of, talking about drafting a grants guide. So this is really timely. But Terentia is a Canadian-based company, but there are, employees that live in the US like myself. So what happens in the US is very important to the company, but we're going to have to focus a lot on state, local, regional funding, foundations, our boards. If your boards have money, we're going to have to diversify those funding streams. In terms of, DEI initiatives, I think we're going to have to get creative with the language we use. And I don't want to say we have to lie, but I think because they've already given us a playbook of all the words that they're, automatically, going to filter grants out for, I think we take that and we learn from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Similarly, depending on different grant initiatives rather than national funding, anything like that. I can't say that I'm an expert on this, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we're all kind of waiting day by day to see how it, and but as Alex talked about at the beginning, the way that your careers have both moved in terms of networking and meeting people and having open conversations. I mean, I think that this is a time when we have to do that more than ever, because we need to hear from each other, and we need to be able to brainstorm and use everybody's perspectives. We need all the perspectives we can get. How do you plan for long-term storage of digital assets? Do you have multiple copies in different locations? And how do you finance long-term preservation? That feels like it's a kind of slow and easy over the plate. I'm not sure what it means, but I feel like that's something that has an answer.
Yes, I'll jump in. So we have our assets in cloud storage through the dams, and we have it in cold storage as well in a different location. And then we have also storage in local hard drives as well. We're moving away from that right now. But long-term preservation is something that's really important, and it's been part of the discussion in our governance committee of how to ensure that we're not overlooking that we have a policy in place and standards in place. So yeah.
That's great. That's great. Alex?
Yeah, I can talk in terms of cloud storage, which is becoming a lot more commonly used, more so in the commercial sector, but we're starting to see a lot more in the cultural heritage sector. So speaking of like Azure blob storage,
Did you say blob?
Blob storage.
Okay. Okay.
I know. I didn't pick the name. I would. But it's geo-redundant. There's multiple copies of your files stored in multiple locations. Your storage can scale up and down depending on the number of digital assets that you need to be stored or need to have stored. There's different storage tiers. So there's hot storage, which means that your digital assets are easily accessible. And then there's cold storage or archive storage, where and this is going to vary by cloud storage provider, where it's accessible. However, there might be kind of a 24-hour delay when you're pulling those assets from cold storage. So there's things that you run into with that. I really love this question, Joyce. Thank you.
Oh.
There's a lot more that I can talk about, in terms of cloud storage, but it's and I saw there was a question about ransomware attacks, so I'll just kind of touch on that
Yes,
really
please.
quick too, because um, we're a single tenant solution, which means that your data is hosted in its own Azure environment. A lot of systems do shared tenancy, so if you're looking for a new system or you currently have a system, ask your service providers how your data is being stored, because I guarantee you it is stored in a shared environment with other client data. And we saw, not this last December, but the December before, where gallery systems had a huge cyber security attack. Over 300 cultural institutions lost their data, like 3 months of data. So as a vendor, I have to, and just out of, ethics, of course, make sure you talk to your vendors about security, how they're securing your data, because yes, ransomware attacks are an issue.
Right, right, right. Great. And Joyce says thank you. She wanted to make sure that we got that in. We still have 44 folks with us. And so I'm going to go ahead and pitch the last question to you, because it seems like we've got people who are keen. Laurie she says, our systems in her museum are, as you've described, siloed, discrete systems. How would you recommend starting the process? Seems like it's emotional and educational as much as it is technical, and there are a lot of different platforms to consider.
Ooh, this is another great question. You need a champion. Honestly, you need somebody who is going to lead the charge on this, who can build that business case and very clearly outline the needs, what your current challenges are, and how that system's going to be able to meet those needs. And a lot of that information that you gather is going to help you narrow down the systems that you review and ultimately select. It can be challenging because getting buy-in can be challenging. That's just because, not everybody is open to change, and that's completely understandable. Adopting a new DAMS or migrating to a new DAMS is not easy. We can get a system standing up in 6 weeks, but the adoption process is at least 6 months or more. And I say 6 months because for smaller cultural institutions, it's a lot easier to do. Larger ones with larger staffs, multiple departments, you need that champion, but you also, in larger institutions, I think, need more of a kind of steering committee where you have representatives across departments who are involved in that process, because the more you have your fellow staff members involved in the process, the more likely they are to want to adopt the platform and the more successful you're going to be.
Yep, yep. Nelly, do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Just a second, the importance of having individuals from multiple departments within a committee. We have a governance committee that spans a number of different departments, and having the insight and just different voices in that is really important. And then I think it really comes down to a lot of education and a lot of training once that platform is chosen.
Great. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Nelly and Alex. I have learned a lot. I've learned a lot, and I've also learned a lot more about how much I don't know. And that's a great way to spend an hour learning about all the stuff that is still out there that we can still find out about. I so appreciate you joining us tonight, and thank you to everybody out there in Curated Conversations land for giving us an hour of your Wednesday evening. We will be back on March 11th with a hybrid Curated Conversation, and we hope we'll see you then. Thank you so much. Good night.